It's April 11th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff push on China. According to the White House, China's tariff is at least 145%, not 125%, which includes a 20% fentanyl levy. Trump also didn't rule out the possibility of extending the 9-day tariff pause. South Korea has sealed diplomatic relations with Syria, Seoul's foreign ministry announced on Friday. With Syria being the last UN member state that South Korea didn't have diplomatic ties with, South Korea now has official relations with all UN member states except North Korea. The People Power Party announced on Thursday that the first round of cutoffs for its partisan primary election will be based on public opinion. The Democratic Party of Korea is set to unveil its presidential primary rules on Friday. The tariff war between the U.S. and China seems far from over. As the White House confirmed, the tariff on Chinese imports now stands at 145% instead of the previous 125%. Our Park Gun-woo leads us this morning.
The White House said Thursday that imports from China now face a retaliatory 145% tariff. According to officials, an existing 20% levy will be added to the 125% tariff announced the day before. That tariff was imposed by Donald Trump in February in response to China's role in supplying fentanyl and its precursors to the U.S. However, Trump also said he remains open to talks with Beijing.
Well, I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries.
On Wednesday, Trump announced a 90-day pause on additional tariffs, keeping a 10% baseline tariff in place for trading countries except China. The following day, he said what happens after that would depend on the situation at that time, but stressed that tariffs would return if no negotiations took place during the pause. Also on Thursday, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett said 15 countries had made explicit offers to lower tariffs, with some being considered and other deals close to being agreed.
We're setting up a very orderly process to prioritize countries and to make sure that the countries that are most important for getting this to the finish line are the countries that we bring in first.
He added that he expects a lot of movement on trade deals within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
And despite blow-for-blow tariffs being exchanged between the two largest economies in the world, China also said it's open for talks with the U.S. Lee-seung has more.
The United States and China have been facing off with tariffs imposed left and right. China responded to U.S. President Donald Trump's 104% tariffs by imposing an 84% tariff on American goods. Trump quickly countered with additional tariffs against China, with levies now at up to 145%. On Thursday, Beijing expressed its willingness to hold talks with the U.S. in the hope of putting an end to the tariff war.
China's position is clear and consistent. If the United States wants to talk, our door is open. However, dialogue must be conducted on an equal footing and on the basis of mutual respect.
The spokesperson also warned that if the U.S. insists on pursuing a tariff war, China will respond and fight till the end. She added that pressure, threats, or blackmail are not the right way to deal with China. The European Union is also open for negotiations with the U.S. as it announced it would put its trade retaliation measures on hold for 90 days. According to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Thursday, the bloc took note of the announcement by President Trump, adding that the EU wants to give negotiations a chance. The European Commission spokesperson also announced the 27-member bloc's willingness to hold talks with Washington.
We believe we can reach all sorts of beneficial outcomes from both sides that would avoid the types of tariffs that we believe are harmful and counterproductive. So we're continuing all our preparations and we will continue to talk to our member states, talk to our industry, and we remain ready to engage in a meaningful way with the US.
Despite the tariff-for-tariff war between major economies, there are now hopes that the parties involved will sit down for talks in a bid to ease the global trade tensions. Lee Jae-myung, Arirang News.
The New York Stock Exchange plunged on Thursday, just a day after Trump announced a 90-day pause for reciprocal tariffs that drove massive gains. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 2.5% from the previous trading session to close under the 40,000 mark. The S&P 500 fell more than 3%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq also dropped more than 4% from the previous trading session. Wall Street saw major sell-offs due to recession concerns amid the escalating U.S. China trade conflict. South Korea has established a formal diplomatic relations with Syria, the last remaining UN member state apart from North Korea that did not have formal ties with Seoul. Our foreign affairs correspondent Peunji reports.
Syria has now become the 194th country in the world to form diplomatic relations with South Korea, marking a milestone for the country as it now has formal ties with all UN member states except North Korea. Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol visited Syria's capital city Damascus this week and signed a joint statement on Thursday local time with his counterpart Assad al-Shaibani.
By establishing diplomatic relations with Syria, the last remaining country with which we had no diplomatic ties, South Korea has now reached a historic milestone of establishing diplomatic relations with all 191 UN member states.
The two sides held a meeting where Cho said South Korea is willing to contribute to reconstruction efforts in Syria and discussed the possibility of Korean companies participating in rebuilding the country. He also promised Seoul will provide humanitarian assistance, including medicine, medical equipment, and rice. During his visit, Cho also met the country's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, and said taking a firm stance against extremism and eliminating chemical weapons will help create an environment conducive to the country's development. South Korea started to work on forging diplomatic ties with Syria after more than 13 years of war recently put an end to the brutal Assad dictatorship, which had maintained a close relationship with North Korea for decades. The Assad family regime, which ruled the country for more than 50 years, collapsed in December during a major offensive by opposition forces. Syria has had diplomatic ties with North Korea since 1966, but the fall of the dictatorship brought about a significant shift in its relations with Pyongyang. Now that South Korea has forged ties with nations that have been close allies of the North, including Cuba last year, this latest diplomatic development is expected to further isolate Pyongyang on the global stage. Peunji, Arirang News.
It's been a week since the court's dismissal of President Yoon Suk-yeol over his martial law order. How is South Korea doing without a leader, and have the South Korean people recovered from the political drama? Let's turn to Professor Robert Kelly this morning. Welcome back, Professor Kelly.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Good morning. A week since the court's dismissal, it also means it's been a week without the country's leader. Professor Kelly, how would you evaluate how the country is doing without a president on the social front?
I think actually Korea has responded to this really well. There will always be politicians who make mistakes and do foolish things. I think it's pretty clear and pretty widely accepted now that Yoon Suk-yeol did that, but he was removed in an orderly process. There was no street violence. This is South Korea's second impeachment in 10 years. It went pretty well as far as impeachments go. I mean, obviously it's unfortunate there was an impeachment, but again, there was no street violence. There was no rioting or anything like that. No one was killed. I believe 4 people were killed after Park Geun-hye was removed in the fighting and the street actions after that. And it seems that the public has broadly accepted this. My own read on this is that I think it's pretty clear that Yoon was guilty. I mean, it all happened right there on live TV. You could see on YouTube, if you wanted, helicopters landing outside the National Assembly. So I think it was a lot clearer this time that guilty was the correct verdict. And I think that's why it's gone down pretty well. That's why I think things have gone off fairly smoothly, because I think there's pretty wide acceptance nationally that the verdict was accurate.
You just mentioned there was no dramatic violence or unrest following the impeachment ruling. Last Friday, what do you think the reason is this time?
Yeah, like I said, I think my best guess is that outside of sort of pro-Yoon diehards, you know, I don't know, maybe 25% of the population, you know, the people on the street waving the flags and all that, you know, you're always going to have those people. My sense is beyond that, that there was pretty wide consensus out there in the country that this impeachment was warranted. And again, I mean, my own sense is throughout the impeachment that I thought that Yoon had a very, very hard road ahead of him because all of this happened in public. I mean, it was right there on TV. I mean, to this day, you can go on YouTube or Naver and you can see the video, right? I mean, you can, like I said, you can see soldiers punching holes in windows, clambering into the National Assembly. I mean, that stuff, that looks like a coup, right? And perhaps there are other things that justice has heard that which we didn't on the outside. I mean, maybe Yoon had a better argument than we know, but just based on the video footage alone from December, I thought it was actually a pretty open and shut case. I think the video footage is very, very damning to Yoon Suk-yeol, and my sense is that most Koreans accepted that too. Certainly when I talk to my students about this, my classes and whatever, there's certainly been that, right? They all sort of said, we watched this on TV. And so I think that would be my guess as to why this went down publicly, why there was very little action, street action in the week after, because I think, again, the consensus outside of the diehard Yoon supporter, I think the consensus here was that the removal was warranted. And the justices reflected that, right? It was a unanimous 8-0 verdict, which pretty much tells you that Yoon's case wasn't very good.
Plus, it took weeks to find out what the ruling was all about, and some experts say that people took that period to really take it all in and digest the ruling. Now, Professor Kelly, would you say the South Korean people have fully exercised the idea of a democracy? I mean, do you think we learned from our experience 8 years ago?
Yeah, actually, I would argue that South Korea is a really good democratic model now, right? This is 2 impeachments in a row that have gone off pretty smoothly. Or widely, again, sort of the public broadly accepted this. You don't have revolution and rioting and terrorism and stuff like that in the street. I mean, if you compare this to Donald Trump's effort to overturn the election in the United States in January 2021, right, where they stormed the Congress building and everything like that, you got people waving Trump flags around. I mean, nothing like that happened here, right? I actually think that Korea has really handled this well. I think the longer term, the big democratic issue I think coming out of this is actually lands on sort of the conservative side of the spectrum. I think it's pretty clear that the South Korean Conservative Party needs to nominate better people. I mean, to me, that's the big takeaway here, right? Is that the conservatives have elected or have chosen 2 flawed candidates in a row, right? And the conservatives need to do a better job on candidate recruitment. They need to find better people so this doesn't happen a third time.
Well, Professor Curley, it's not over. We have another huge national project, a snap presidential election in June. Now, do you think we can have a civil election this time?
Yeah, I do. I would be surprised if this goes haywire, if there was any kind of extrajudicial action or something like that, because again, South Korea has done this before. It was just 8 years ago, so there is, if you will, a sort of model of post-impeachment electioneering, and it went pretty well back then. And Moon Jae-in won that, and there was no dispute. The South Korean conservatives didn't go on the street and riot or something like that. So again, unless the candidates do something really extraordinary in the next 2 months, which I find unlikely, it doesn't strike me that there's any real reason to assume that this is going to fail or go sideways or something like that. It will probably be a fairly straightforward election. I mean, this is something like South Korea's 8th presidential election since democratization. And so my sense is, again, unless one of the candidates really makes some outrageous claim, and I would encourage Lee Jae-myung, who is the front runner, not to make outrageous claims about Yoon Suk-yeol, right? To sort of treat this as a normal election. If you do, then my guess is that things will go off smoothly.
Better not to take that risk. Professor Kelly, what next after the election then? I mean, how do we welcome a new administration in a civil and democratic manner?
Yeah, so I think that, again, my guess is that Lee Jae-myung will probably win, right? And he'll sort of govern, I imagine, as a fairly typical South Korean progressive, which means that sort of he'll be more sort of interested in détente with North Korea. My guess is administration will be quite similar to that of Moon Jae-in's. South Korean conservatives won't like it, but I don't really see any reason why there has to be some kind of constitutional breach in response to a victory by Lee Jae-myung. I think the bigger issue going forward then is whether or not South Korea needs constitutional reform. This is sort of out there and floating around now, right? Should South Korea move from one presidency 5-year term to 2 terms for 4 years? I don't know if that would actually sort of resolve the issues. My own sense is that they're more specifically about candidate recruitment to make sure you don't have people who do things that wind up in impeachment. But I think there's a constitutional reform, I think, is now more likely than at any time in the history of the Republic of Korea.
Alrighty, thank you so much for sharing your insight and, of course, connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it, Professor Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
So the race for the top office is just getting started. The People Power Party on Thursday disclosed its partisan primary election plan. So the first round of cutoffs will be based on public opinion. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has this report.
The rules for the People Power Party's presidential primary are set. With over 10 contenders expected to vie for the nomination, there will be a series of cutoffs. But their biggest challenge, winning public support amid the fallout from President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. That's why the first round of cutoffs to leave 4 contenders will be an open survey to all citizens, not just their registered members.
The decision to base the first round entirely on the general public was made in response to widespread calls for an open primary and greater weight on public sentiment. This ensures that candidates who align with the public's expectations can advance to the four-way race.
As for the specific timeline, the first round of candidates will be finalized by April 16. After 3 days of debates, the general public poll will leave 4 contenders. For the next few days, the 4 candidates will face the media and debate each other. The next cutoff survey starts on the 27th, and by the 29th, the remaining 2 will be decided through an open poll for 50% and eligible PPP electors for 50%, or registered PPP members who've paid for party membership at least once in the past year. If one of the 4 contenders receives more than 50% of the final votes here, he or she will be the final candidate. If not, on April 30th, a debate will be held between the 2 contenders. On May 3rd, the PPP will hold a convention and announce its candidate. Meanwhile, to prevent tactical voting in open polls where opposition supporters might try to boost a weaker PPP candidate, respondents will be asked the party they support before taking the survey. As for the race, the latest to enter is former PPP chair Han Dong-hoon. Speaking at the National Assembly, Han vowed to block what he called Lee Jae-myung's monstrous administration and says he wants a generational shift in politics.
I'm going to create a nation where the citizens come first, the middle class grows, and practicality beats ideology. With that in mind, I will make a change in politics, the era, and the generation.
Once the closest to President Yoon, Han broke ranks in early 2024 and even backed Yoon's impeachment. Because of this, he is expected to score high on the all-open voting tallies. Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo is also likely a beneficiary, and his declaration is set to come next Monday. On the other hand, Yoon's close political ally Na Kyung-won also announced that she will declare her candidacy on Friday. Kim Moon-soo and An Chol-soo are among those that's declared candidacy already. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And former Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung has announced his 3rd run for the nation's top office after stepping down as the party leader on Wednesday. In a video message on Thursday, he pledged dedication to the people in a new vision dubbed K Initiative that highlights Korea's ability to turn crisis into opportunity. He will elaborate on this vision at the parliament on Friday. Other DP candidates are former lawmaker Kim Do-kwan and governor of Gyeonggi-do province Kim Dong-yeon, who earlier declared their intentions to run in the race. And DP has tapped Park Bum-gye, a 4-term lawmaker, as its election committee chair. And the party will announce its partisan primary election plan today on Friday. U.S. military commanders have voiced concerns over a potential troop withdrawal from South Korea at the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing held in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Samuel Paparo, said losing U.S. forces would mean a higher probability of North Korea invading the South. Xavier Brunson, the commander of U.S. forces in Korea, also said a reduction would be problematic, adding that U.S. presence helps deter threats from China and Russia. Now, roughly 28,500 American troops are stationed here in South Korea. UNESCO has officially listed the Jeju 4-3 archives in its Memory of the World Register, recognizing their historical value, authenticity, and universal significance. The decision was confirmed Thursday local time in France, according to Jeju officials. The archives contain around 15,000 records, including victim testimonies and documents from the decades-long truth and reconciliation process related to the April 3rd incident, and following civilian massacres on Jeju Island in 1948 and 1949. With this latest edition, South Korea now has 20 entries in UNESCO's Memory of the World Register.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Beginning in Europe, defense ministers of 31 nations convened in Brussels to discuss the formation of a multinational force aimed at supporting Ukraine. The so-called Coalition of the Willing, led by the United Kingdom and France, aims to establish a framework for ensuring lasting peace in the region. On Thursday local time at the NATO headquarters in Brussels, the defense ministers deliberated on creating a reassurance force for Ukraine in the event of a future ceasefire with Russia. The proposed force is envisioned to comprise of between 10,000 and 30,000 troops stationed away from active front lines. However, uncertainties remain over the role of the United States. While the U.S. did not participate in the Brussels meeting, European ministers underscored the importance of American support. Meanwhile, in the United States, a helicopter carrying a family from Spain crashed in New York City's Hudson River, resulting in the deaths of all 6 individuals on board, including the pilot. On Thursday afternoon local time at 3:17 p.m., a Bell 206 helicopter operated by New York Helicopters crashed into the Hudson River near Lower Manhattan. The aircraft carried a Spanish family of 2 adults and 3 children, along with the pilot. Eyewitnesses observed the helicopter breaking apart mid-air before crashing upside down into the water. The Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board have begun investigations into the cause of the crash. Mayor Eric Adams extended condolences to the victims' families, describing the incident as heartbreaking and tragic. Also in the United States, consumer prices fell by 0.1% in March, marking the first monthly decline in nearly 5 years. The decrease was primarily driven by a 6.3% drop in gasoline prices and reduced costs for used vehicles, airline fares, and hotel accommodations. The annual inflation rate eased to 2.4%, its lowest since September 2021, while core inflation, excluding food and energy, rose by just 0.1%. However, economists caution that this relief may be temporary, with new tariffs expected to exert upward pressure on prices in the coming months. On Saturday night, April 12th, a full pink moon that is smaller and fainter will be visible in the April spring night sky. The so-called micromoon, the smallest and faintest in 2025, occurs when the moon is at its furthest point from Earth, approximately 406,006 kilometers away. According to NASA, the micromoon will be up to 14% smaller and around 30% dimmer than a supermoon. Despite its name, which originates from the seasonal bloom of pink wildflowers in early spring, the pink moon won't appear pink.
Spring is in full swing across Korea. Cherry blossoms are in full bloom, making a perfect time to step outside and take in the beauty of the season. We will be seeing further warming up this afternoon, making it feel more like May than April in most parts of Korea. But while it's a great day to be outdoors, we do want to remind you that the capital area is likely to see unhealthy air quality levels for most of the day today. And many places places could see their highest temperatures so far this spring. Seoul getting up to 23 degrees, Daejeon, Gwangju at 24 under mostly sunny skies nationwide today. Then there will be a dramatic weather shift this weekend. Rain is in the forecast from Jeju tomorrow morning, dropping heavier rain to Jeju and the south coast along with thunderstorms. Meanwhile, central parts of Korea could be seeing 5 to 20 millimeters of rainfall. And this band of rain will bring a chillier air to the country on Sunday. So please try to make the most of the warmth while it lasts.
That brings an end to our morning edition of Arirang News. A new day at Arirang will be back next Monday at the same time, 10 a.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.